The bread was still warm in her trembling hands when the floorboard beneath her boot groaned like a dying man, and Helena Foster froze in the darkened kitchen of the ranch house, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She had not eaten in 3 days, not since she had fled the brothel in Fort Sumner, where the madam had beaten her bloody for refusing another customer's advances. The New Mexico territory stretched vast and unforgiving around this isolated ranch, and Helena had walked through the September night of 1878 until her feet bled through her worn shoes, following the lamplight that promised food and perhaps a moment's respite before she moved on. She had not expected anyone to be awake at this hour, but the sound of boots on wooden floors told her otherwise, and she clutched the loaf of bread tighter, prepared to run even though exhaustion made her legs feel like lead. "Put your hands where I can see them." The voice was deep and measured, not cruel but firm, and Helena turned slowly to face the man who stood in the doorway with a rifle pointed at the floor rather than at her chest. He was tall and broad-shouldered, perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that caught the moonlight streaming through the window. He wore no shirt, just trousers hastily pulled on, and Helena could see the scars that crisscrossed his chest and arms, marks of a life lived hard under the western sun. "I am sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I am so sorry. I will leave. Please do not shoot me." Warren Blake studied the woman before him, taking in her torn dress, the bruises that mottled her face and arms, the way she swayed on her feet as though a strong wind might knock her over. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, with auburn hair that had escaped its pins and green eyes wide with terror. She looked like she had walked through hell itself, and something in his chest tightened at the sight of her desperate hunger. "Take what you need," he said quietly, lowering the rifle completely and leaning it against the wall. "You are safe here." Helena stared at him, certain she had misheard. Men did not speak to women like her with kindness. Men took what they wanted and left bruises as payment. "What?" "I said you are safe here." Warren moved slowly into the kitchen, careful not to startle her, and lit the oil lamp on the table. Golden light flooded the room, revealing shelves stocked with provisions, a pot of stew still sitting on the stove from his evening meal. "Sit down before you fall down." "When did you last eat?" "I cannot pay you," Helena said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I have nothing. I can work, I can clean or cook or tend animals, but I have no money, and I did not ask you to pay me." Warren pulled out a chair and gestured to it. "Sit." She obeyed because her body gave her no choice, sinking onto the chair with a small sound of relief. Warren moved to the stove and ladled hot stew into a bowl, then set it before her with a spoon and a cup of water. Helena looked at the food as though it might disappear if she blinked, then picked up the spoon with shaking hands and began to eat. She forced herself to go slowly despite her screaming hunger, but tears streamed down her face as the warm food hit her empty stomach. Warren said nothing, just moved to the window and stared out at his land while she ate. He had bought this ranch 3 years ago with money saved from years of working cattle drives and breaking horses, carving out a life for himself in this harsh territory, where a man's past mattered less than his ability to survive. He ran a few dozen head of cattle and bred horses that were known throughout the territory for their stamina and intelligence. He lived alone because he preferred it that way, or at least he had convinced himself he did. "What is your name?" he asked when he heard her spoon scrape the bottom of the bowl. "Helena Foster." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I came from Fort Sumner. I have been walking for 2 days. That is 15 miles. "I know," she laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. "I did not know where else to go. I saw your light from the ridge and thought perhaps I could take some food and be gone before anyone noticed." Warren turned to face her, crossing his arms over his bare chest. "What were you running from?" Helena's jaw tightened. "Does it matter?" "It does if someone is going to come looking for you on my land." She met his gaze, and Warren saw steel beneath the exhaustion. "The madam at the Silver Spur might send someone, but she will not send them far. I was not valuable enough to chase across the territory. I was just another girl who caused trouble." Warren understood then, and fresh anger burned in his gut at the bruises on her face. "You worked at the brothel, not by choice." Helena's voice was flat. "My father sold me to cover his gambling debts when I was 17. I have been there 5 years. 3 nights ago, a man got rough and I fought back. The madam said I had cost her a valuable customer and beat me until I could not stand. I left before she decided to make an example of me in a more permanent way." The casual way she recounted this horror made Warren's hands curl into fists. He had known brothels were part of every frontier town, had availed himself of their services on occasion during his younger years. But he had never stopped to consider the circumstances that brought women to such places. Looking at Helena now, seeing the way she held herself as though expecting another blow at any moment, something shifted in his chest. "You can stay here," he said. Helena's eyes widened. "What? You can stay here. I have a spare room. You can rest and recover, and when you are strong enough, you can decide where you want to go. Or you can stay and work if you want. I could use help around the ranch." "Why would you do this?" Suspicion crept into her voice. "What do you want from me?" Warren held her gaze steadily. "Nothing." "I want nothing from you, except maybe some decent cooking and help with the horses if you know how to handle them. I have more work than I can manage alone, and you need a place to be safe. Seems like a fair arrangement to me." Helena studied him, searching for the lie, the trick, the inevitable moment when he would reveal his true intentions. But Warren Blake's dark eyes held only honest concern, and the set of his jaw suggested a man who meant what he said. She had become an expert at reading men over the past 5 years, at sensing danger before it struck, and she sensed none of that from this stranger who had found her stealing his bread. "All right," she whispered. "Thank you." Warren nodded. "The spare room is down the hall, second door on the right. There is a wash basin and clean water. I will bring you some clothes that might fit. They belonged to my sister before she got married and moved to Santa Fe. Get some rest. We can talk more in the morning." Helena rose on unsteady legs, still clutching the bread she had stolen. Warren noticed, and his mouth quirked in something almost like a smile. "You can take that with you if you want." She looked down at the bread, then back at him, and for the first time in 5 years, Helena Foster felt something she had thought dead in her chest: hope. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a quilt and a window that looked out over the rolling hills. Helena washed her face and hands in the basin, then stripped off her torn dress and put on the simple cotton nightgown Warren had left outside her door. She climbed into the bed and pulled the quilt over her, and despite her exhaustion, she lay awake for a long time, listening to the sound of the wind across the plains and waiting for the other shoe to drop. But Warren Blake did not come to her door making demands. She heard him moving around the house for a while, then the creak of his own bedroom door closing, and finally silence except for the normal sounds of a house settling in the night. Helena closed her eyes and let herself sink into sleep, the first real rest she had known in longer than she could remember. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a moment, panic seized her as she forgot where she was, but then memory returned and she sat up slowly, her body aching from her long walk and the beating she had endured. Someone had left a pile of clothes outside her door, a simple dress in blue cotton, undergarments, and even a pair of sturdy boots that looked barely worn. Helena dressed quickly, braided her hair, and ventured out into the main part of the house. Warren was in the kitchen, frying eggs and bacon at the stove. He had dressed in worn denim pants and a work shirt, his dark hair still damp from washing. He glanced up when she entered and gestured to the table. "Coffee is hot. Breakfast will be ready in a minute." Helena poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down, watching him work. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own space, and she found herself noticing the breadth of his shoulders, the way his hands handled the cast iron skillet with practiced ease. He was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw and a mouth that looked like it smiled more often than it frowned, though there was a carefulness in how he moved around her, as though she were a wild horse he was trying not to spook. He served her a plate piled high with eggs, bacon, and biscuits, then sat across from her with his own meal. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Warren spoke. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," Helena admitted. "But better, thank you for the clothes. They fit perfectly." "My sister Elizabeth is about your size. She would want you to have them." Warren took a sip of his coffee. "I need to ride out and check the fences in the north pasture today. You are welcome to come with me if you feel up to it, or you can stay here and rest." "I will not force you to work until you are healed." Helena considered this. Part of her wanted to stay in the safety of the house, but a larger part knew that accepting Warren's charity without contributing would make her feel like she was back at the brothel, existing only at someone else's pleasure. "I will come with you. I grew up on a farm in Missouri before my father moved us to the territory. I know horses and cattle." Warren's expression lightened with approval. "Good. We will leave in an hour. That will give you time to finish eating and get your strength up." They rode out together under a sky so blue it hurt to look at, Warren on a bay gelding and Helena on a gentle mare named Daisy. The September air was still warm but carried the first hints of the coming autumn, and the grasslands stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by the occasional cottonwood tree or rocky outcropping. Warren showed her the boundaries of his land, pointing out landmarks and explaining his plans for expanding the ranch over the coming years. Helena listened and asked intelligent questions, and Warren found himself surprised by how much she knew about ranching. She had a good eye for cattle, and pointed out a few head that looked like they might be developing hoof problems. When they stopped to repair a section of fence, she worked alongside him without complaint, her hands quick and sure with the wire and posts. "You are good at this," Warren said as they finished the repair. "I told you I grew up on a farm." Helena wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a smudge of dirt across her cheek. "My father taught me everything before the gambling got bad and he lost the farm. We moved to Fort Sumner because he thought he could make his fortune at the card tables. Instead, he just went deeper into debt." "Where is he now?" "Dead. He was shot in a dispute over a card game about 2 years ago. I did not even find out until weeks later." She said it without emotion, and Warren understood that whatever love she had once felt for her father had died long before he did. They worked together throughout the day, stopping at noon to eat the lunch Warren had packed. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, they rode back to the ranch house. Helena felt the exhaustion in her bones, but also something else, a sense of purpose, of usefulness. Warren Blake had not looked at her with pity or disgust or hungry calculation. He had looked at her as though she were simply another person, worthy of respect and basic human decency, and that alone was more valuable than all the gold in the territory. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Helena woke before dawn and made breakfast while Warren tended to the animals. They worked together throughout the day, repairing fences, moving cattle, breaking young horses to saddle. Helena proved to be a natural with the horses, speaking to them in low, soothing tones that calmed even the most skittish colts. Warren watched her work and felt admiration growing into something more complicated. She was beautiful, that was undeniable, but it was more than that. She had a strength born of surviving things that would have broken lesser people, and a fierce independence that showed in the way she threw herself into every task. She never asked for more than what she needed, never tried to use her looks to manipulate him, never made him feel like she expected anything beyond the fair arrangement they had struck. And Warren Blake, who had spent 3 years convincing himself he was content with solitude, found himself looking forward to the sound of her voice, the way she laughed when one of the barn cats did something amusing, the quiet companionship of working alongside her as the sun crossed the sky. One evening in late October, they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Helena had been at the ranch for nearly 2 months, and the bruises had faded from her face, replaced by a healthy glow from days spent outdoors. She had gained weight, her body filling out with proper food and rest, and she moved with a confidence Warren had not seen in her at first. "Winter will be here soon," Warren said, breaking the comfortable silence. "It gets cold out here and the snow can be heavy. If you want to move on before the weather turns, I will give you money for a ticket wherever you want to go." Helena turned to look at him, surprise evident on her face. "Do you want me to leave?" "No." The word came out more forcefully than Warren intended. He cleared his throat. "No, I do not want you to leave, but I do not want you to feel trapped here either. You should know that you have choices." "I know that." Helena's voice was soft. "That is why I want to stay. For the first time in 5 years, I am making my own choices about my own life. I choose to be here, Warren, if you will have me." Their eyes met, and Warren felt the air between them crackle with something unspoken. He had been careful not to touch her beyond what was necessary, had never let himself think about the way her hair caught the firelight or how her smile made his chest feel tight. She was healing from trauma he could barely imagine, and he would not take advantage of her vulnerability for anything in the world. But the way she was looking at him now, with her green eyes steady and sure, made him wonder if perhaps she felt the same pull he did. "I will always have you," he said quietly. "You have become essential to this place, to me." Helena's breath caught, and for a moment Warren thought she might lean toward him, but instead she looked away, wrapping her arms around herself against the evening chill. "I am not sure I know how to be anything other than what I was forced to be. I am not sure I know how to be the kind of woman a man like you would want." Warren stood and moved to the porch railing, gripping it hard. "You are already exactly the kind of woman I want. You are strong and smart and capable. You make me laugh. You work harder than any hand I have ever hired, and you make this house feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep between work." He turned to face her. "But I will not push you, Helena. We have time." She looked up at him, and tears shimmered in her eyes. "No one has ever been patient with me before." Then they were fools. The winter came hard and fast that year, with snow piling up in drifts taller than a man and temperatures that plunged below zero at night. Warren and Helena worked together to keep the animals fed and watered, breaking ice in the troughs every morning and hauling hay from the barn to the feeding stations. It was brutal, exhausting work, but they fell into a rhythm, moving around each other with the ease of people who understood each other's capabilities. On a particularly bitter evening in January of 1879, a blizzard swept down from the mountains with such ferocity that Warren barely made it back from the barn before visibility dropped to nothing. He stumbled through the door covered in snow, his face red with cold, and Helena rushed to help him out of his frozen coat. "That came up fast," he said through chattering teeth. "We will be snowed in for at least 2 days." Helena guided him to the fireplace and wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, then poured him a cup of coffee laced with whiskey from the bottle they kept for medicinal purposes. Warren drank it gratefully, feeling warmth slowly return to his extremities. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windows and piling snow against the walls. They spent that evening as they had spent many others, sitting by the fire and talking. But something was different tonight, a tension in the air that had nothing to do with the storm raging outside. Helena sat close to Warren, closer than she usually did, and when their hands accidentally touched, she did not pull away. "I used to dream about having a normal life," she said quietly, staring into the flames. "When I was at the brothel, I would imagine what it would be like to wake up in a house that I chose to be in, with someone who cared about me as a person and not as a commodity. I thought it was impossible. I thought I had been ruined for anything good." "You were never ruined," Warren said fiercely. "What was done to you was not your fault, and it does not define you." Helena turned to look at him, and the firelight caught in her eyes, making them glow like emeralds. "How can you believe that?" "You know what I was, what I did. You survived. That is what you did." Warren reached out and gently touched her face, his calloused thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "You survived something that would have destroyed most people, and you came out the other side still able to be kind, still able to laugh, still able to care about things. You are the strongest person I have ever met, Helena Foster." A tear slid down her cheek, and then she was moving, closing the small distance between them and pressing her lips to his. Warren froze for just a moment, giving her time to pull back if she wanted, but when she did not, he wrapped his arms around her and kissed her back with all the longing he had been suppressing for months. It was not a gentle kiss. It was fierce and desperate, full of months of unspoken feelings and the knowledge that they had both been alone for too long. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Helena rested her forehead against his. "I am afraid," she whispered. "Of what?" "Of wanting this too much. Of losing it. Of not being enough." Warren cupped her face in both hands, making her look at him. "You are more than enough. You have always been enough. And I am not going anywhere, Helena. I am yours for as long as you will have me." She kissed him again, and this time when they pulled apart, she took his hand and led him to her bedroom. What happened there was tender and slow, Warren taking his time to show her that intimacy could be something beautiful rather than something to be endured. He kissed every scar, physical and otherwise, and when Helena cried, he held her and whispered that she was safe, she was loved, she was home. The blizzard raged for 3 days, but inside the ranch house, Warren and Helena built their own shelter against the cold. They talked about things they had never told anyone, shared secrets and fears and hopes. Warren told her about his parents dying of cholera when he was 15, about raising his younger sister while working cattle drives, about the loneliness that had become so familiar he had stopped noticing it until she arrived. Helena told him about the girl she had been before her father's addiction destroyed their family, about the dreams she had abandoned, about the small acts of kindness she had witnessed even in the darkest places. When the storm finally broke and they dug their way out to tend the animals, something fundamental had changed between them. They moved as one unit now, completely in sync, and when their eyes met across the barn or the dinner table, there was an understanding that needed no words. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it transformed the brown landscape into a sea of wildflowers. Warren proposed to Helena on a hillside covered in Indian paintbrush, going down on one knee and offering her a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. "I do not have much to offer," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Just this ranch, a lot of hard work, and a heart that has been yours since the night I found you in my kitchen. But if you will marry me, Helena, I will spend every day of my life making sure you know you are cherished." Helena looked down at this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved, who had seen her at her worst and chosen to see her value anyway, and knew that her answer had been written from the moment he said she was safe. "Yes," she said simply, and Warren slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her so thoroughly that they both forgot where they were until one of the horses whinnied impatiently. They were married in Fort Sumner in May of 1879 by the circuit preacher, with Warren's sister Elizabeth and her husband traveling from Santa Fe to attend. It was a simple ceremony, but Helena had never felt more beautiful than she did in the white dress Elizabeth had helped her sew, standing beside Warren and promising to love him for the rest of her days. The marriage was not without its challenges. Helena sometimes woke from nightmares, her body rigid with remembered fear, and Warren would hold her until the shaking stopped. There were moments when someone would look at her in town with recognition or judgment, and Warren would step closer, his presence a silent declaration that she was under his protection. There were times when Helena struggled to believe that this life was real, that she deserved this happiness, and Warren would have to remind her gently but firmly that she did. But there was also joy, more than Helena had ever imagined possible. There was the satisfaction of working land that belonged to them both, of building something together with their own hands. There was the laughter that filled the house when they played cards in the evening or when one of the barn cats did something ridiculous. There was the pleasure of falling asleep in Warren's arms every night and waking up to his kisses every morning. There was the deep contentment of being known completely and loved anyway. In the spring of 1880, Helena discovered she was pregnant. She told Warren over breakfast, her hands shaking slightly as she set down her coffee cup. "I am going to have a baby." Warren's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: surprise, joy, fear, and then settling on fierce protectiveness. He came around the table and pulled her into his arms. "Are you all right? How are you feeling?" "Scared," Helena admitted. "But happy. So happy, Warren." "We are going to have a baby," he repeated. And then he laughed, picking her up and spinning her around until she was laughing too, both of them giddy with the reality of it. The pregnancy was not easy. Helena was sick for the first few months, and as summer turned to autumn, she grew increasingly uncomfortable in the heat. But Warren was attentive to her every need, taking on more of the ranch work himself and insisting she rest. Elizabeth came to stay for the last month, bringing her own expertise from having had 2 children of her own. Their son was born on a cold December night, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his displeasure at being evicted from his warm home. Warren held him for the first time with tears streaming down his face, marveling at the tiny fingers that gripped his thumb and the perfect features of this person they had made together. "What should we name him?" Helena asked, exhausted but glowing as she watched her husband fall in love with their child. "Thomas," Warren said without hesitation, "after my father, Thomas Warren Blake." Helena smiled. "It is perfect." Thomas was a colicky baby who kept them up most nights for the first 3 months, but neither Warren nor Helena minded. They took turns walking him around the house, singing lullabies and telling him stories about the ranch he would grow up on. Warren would hold his son against his chest and tell him about the horses he would learn to ride, the skills he would master, the good man he would become. Helena would rock him by the window and point out the stars, whispering promises that he would always be safe, always be loved, always be free to choose his own path. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Warren's reputation for breeding excellent horses spread throughout the territory, and they were able to expand their herd and hire 2 ranch hands to help with the work. Helena managed the books and the household, proving to have a sharp mind for business that complemented Warren's practical ranching skills. In the evenings, after Thomas was asleep, Warren and Helena would sit on the porch as they had done years before, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Warren would hold her hand and think about that September night when he had found her stealing bread, frightened and desperate, and marvel at how much life could change. He had offered her safety, but she had given him everything: love, purpose, a family, a reason to build something that would last beyond his own lifetime. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not come here that night?" Helena asked once, her head resting on his shoulder. "No," Warren said firmly, "because you did come here. You were meant to come here. And everything that happened after was meant to happen too. You do not believe in fate. I believe in you and me and what we have built together. Call it whatever you want." In 1883, Helena gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah after Warren's mother. She was a calm baby, the opposite of her rambunctious older brother, and Warren doted on her shamelessly. He would carry her around the ranch, showing her everything and explaining the workings of their world to her, as though she could understand. Helena would watch them together and feel such overwhelming love that she sometimes had to turn away to hide her tears. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, fearless and curious about everything. Warren taught him to ride when he was 4, putting him on the gentlest mare and walking alongside until the boy found his balance. Helena taught him his letters and numbers, determined that he would have the education she had missed. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple pleasures. There were droughts that tested their resilience and winters that pushed them to their limits. There were livestock losses and close calls with rattlesnakes and all the dangers that came with frontier life. But there were also 4th of July celebrations in Fort Sumner, Christmas mornings, with the children's excited shouts filling the house. Quiet Sunday afternoons when the whole family would ride out to their favorite spot by the creek and spend the day fishing and telling stories. In 1887, when Thomas was 7 and Sarah was 4, Helena gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named James and Daniel. Warren joked that they now had enough children to run the ranch without hiring hands, and Helena laughed and said they would need to build an addition onto the house if he wanted any more. They built the addition the following summer, adding 3 more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. As the children grew, the ranch house filled with noise and chaos and love. Thomas showed an early aptitude for working with horses, spending every spare moment in the barn or the training paddock. Sarah developed a talent for drawing, filling page after page with sketches of the animals and the landscape. The twins were inseparable, getting into mischief together and blaming each other in equal measure. Warren taught all his children the value of hard work, honesty, and treating every person with basic dignity regardless of their circumstances. Helena taught them to be kind, to stand up for those who could not stand up for themselves, to never judge someone without knowing their story. Neither of them ever explicitly told the children about Helena's past. But as they grew older and began to understand more of the world, they pieced together enough to know that their mother had survived something terrible before finding safety with their father. It made them protective of her, fierce in her defense if anyone in town ever dared to speak ill of her. More than that, it taught them that people were not defined by the worst things that happened to them, that redemption and new beginnings were possible, that love could heal wounds that seemed unhealable. In 1895, when Thomas was 15, a man came to the ranch looking for work. He was weathered and tired, with the look of someone who had been riding for a long time. Warren hired him on for the summer, and it was not until several weeks later that Helena overheard him talking to one of the other hands and recognized his voice. He had been a customer at the Silver Spur, one of the men who had paid to use her body when she was trapped there. Helena said nothing, but Warren noticed how she flinched whenever the man came near, how she found reasons to stay in the house when he was around. That evening, after the children were in bed, Warren asked her what was wrong. Helena told him, the words coming slowly at first and then in a rush. Warren listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening with each sentence. When she finished, he pulled her into his arms and held her for a long moment. "He will be gone by morning," Warren said quietly, "and he will not bother you again. Warren, do not do anything that will bring trouble." "I will not. But he will not work on my land, and he will understand that if he ever speaks of knowing you from before, he will answer to me." True to his word, Warren paid the man what he was owed that night and told him to leave at first light. The man tried to argue, but something in Warren's expression made him think better of it. He rode out before sunrise, and Helena never saw him again. It was a reminder that the past was never truly gone, that shadows could reach forward even across years and miles. But it was also a reminder of how much she had gained, how different her life was now. She was not that frightened girl anymore, stealing bread in the dark. She was Helena Blake, wife and mother, owner of a prosperous ranch, respected member of the community. She had a husband who would move mountains to protect her, children who adored her, a life she had built with her own 2 hands. As the 19th century drew to a close, Warren and Helena watched their children grow into young adults. Thomas took over more of the ranch operations, proving to have inherited his father's skill with horses and his mother's business sense. Sarah announced her intention to become a teacher, and Warren and Helena sent her to Santa Fe to attend normal school, bursting with pride at her graduation. The twins, now teenagers, worked the ranch with the easy competence of boys raised to the work. In the spring of 1899, Thomas introduced them to a young woman named Caroline, the daughter of a rancher from the next county over. She was smart and capable and looked at Thomas the way Helena had once looked at Warren, and Helena gave her blessing immediately. They were married that summer in a ceremony much larger than Warren and Helena's had been, with half the county in attendance. Warren was 51 now, his dark hair shot through with silver, his face lined from years under the sun. But he was still strong, still capable of a full day's work, still looked at Helena with the same love he had shown her 21 years ago. Helena was 44, her auburn hair fading to a softer shade, her hands calloused from work, but always gentle when she touched her husband's face. They had built something extraordinary together, not just a successful ranch but a family, a legacy that would outlive them both. The scared young woman and the lonely rancher who had found each other by chance had created a life neither of them had dared to dream of. One evening in the autumn of 1901, after all the children had moved into their own lives and the house was quiet again, Warren and Helena sat on the porch as they had done countless times before. The sky was ablaze with the colors of sunset, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage across the grasslands. "You ever miss it?" Warren asked. The noise and chaos when they were all young, Helena considered this. Sometimes, but I also love having you to myself again." Warren smiled and pulled her closer. "I was just thinking the same thing." He paused, then said, "I never told you this, but sometimes I still see that night in my mind. You standing in my kitchen with that bread, looking like you expected me to shoot you. I had no idea that my life was about to change forever. Neither did I." Helena turned to look at him, her green eyes soft with emotion. "You saved my life, Warren, not just that night, but every day after. You gave me back to myself." "No," Warren said, shaking his head. "You saved yourself. You were brave enough to run, brave enough to take a chance on a strange man's kindness, brave enough to believe you deserved better than what you had been given. All I did was give you a safe place to land." "You gave me everything," Helena insisted. "A home, a family, a reason to believe in goodness again. You showed me what love was supposed to be." Warren kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "We saved each other then. You made my house a home, made me understand what I had been missing all those years alone. You gave me purpose beyond just surviving." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, holding hands the way they had done for over 2 decades. The ranch spread out around them, the land they had worked together, the home they had built, the life they had created against all odds. In the distance, they could hear the lowing of cattle settling for the night and the whicker of horses in the barn. Closer, there was the creak of the porch swing, the sound of their own breathing, the quiet rhythm of 2 hearts that had learned to beat in sync. "I would do it all again," Helena said softly. "Every hard day, every struggle, every moment of fear, because it led me here to you, to this life." "So would I," Warren agreed, 1,000 times over. As darkness fell over the New Mexico territory, and the ranch house glowed with lamplight, Warren and Helena Blake remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms and in the knowledge that their love story, which had begun with an act of desperation and an offer of kindness, had become something far greater than either of them had imagined possible. They had 4 children who were making their own ways in the world, carrying forward the lessons their parents had taught them. They had a ranch that would provide for generations to come. They had each other, still fiercely devoted after all these years, still finding new ways to show their love every single day. It was not the life Helena had imagined when she fled Fort Sumner in terror, stealing through the night toward an uncertain future. It was not the life Warren had expected when he bought a lonely ranch and resigned himself to bachelorhood. But it was a life they had built together, brick by brick, day by day, through sheer determination and an unwavering commitment to each other. Years later, when their grandchildren asked how they had found each other, Helena and Warren would smile and tell the story of that September night in 1878. They would talk about stolen bread and unexpected kindness, about fear giving way to trust, about 2 lonely souls who found exactly what they needed in each other. They would explain that love was not always a lightning strike. Sometimes it was a slow-growing thing, planted in darkness and nurtured into light. And when the grandchildren asked what the secret was to staying in love for so long, Warren and Helena would exchange a look that held decades of shared history, and Warren would say, "We chose each other. Every single day, we chose each other." Helena would add, "And we never forgot what it felt like to be lost before we were found. That makes you grateful for what you have." The ranch continued to prosper under their stewardship, becoming known throughout New Mexico as one of the finest horse breeding operations in the territory. Thomas took over full management in 1905 with his father's guidance and proved himself more than capable. Sarah opened a school in Fort Sumner, teaching the children of ranchers and townspeople alike. The twins went into business together, buying and selling cattle throughout the Southwest. Warren and Helena spent their later years traveling occasionally, visiting their children and grandchildren, taking trips to places they had never seen. But they always came back to the ranch, to the house where their love story had begun, to the land that had given them everything. In the spring of 1915, as they celebrated their 36th anniversary, Warren took Helena back to that hillside covered in wildflowers where he had proposed. They were both older now, moving more slowly, but the love between them burned as bright as ever. "I have loved you every day since I found you in my kitchen," Warren said, taking her hands in his, "and I will love you every day until I draw my last breath and beyond." Helena kissed him, tasting salt from the tears on both their faces. "You told me I was safe that night. You kept that promise every single day. You made me feel safe to love, safe to hope, safe to be myself. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." They stood together on that hillside as the wind moved through the grass and the wildflowers swayed around them. Two people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life in the light. Their story had started with desperation and kindness, had grown through hard work and devotion, and had blossomed into something beautiful and lasting. As the sun set over the New Mexico landscape, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson, Warren and Helena Blake walked back to their ranch house hand in hand, their steps matched, their hearts full, their love as strong as the day they first admitted it to each other. They had built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone, not just in the ranch and the horses and the land, but in the children and grandchildren who carried their values forward, who understood that every person deserves dignity and that redemption is always possible, that love can heal even the deepest wounds if you are brave enough to accept it. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done, and the stars emerged one by one in the vast western sky, Warren and Helena would sit on their porch as they had done for nearly 4 decades, holding hands and watching the night fall over the land they loved, grateful beyond measure for the chain of events that had brought them together and kept them together through all the years. The stolen bread that had begun it all was long forgotten, replaced by thousands of shared meals, millions of shared moments, a lifetime of shared love. What remained was the simple truth that had sustained them through everything. They had found each other when they both needed saving, and they had saved each other in every way that mattered. Their love story, born in that midnight kitchen encounter, had grown into something extraordinary, a testament to the power of kindness, the possibility of redemption, and the transformative nature of love freely given and gratefully received. It was a story that would be told and retold by their descendants, a reminder that even in the hardest times, in the harshest places, hope could survive and flourish if given the chance. And as Warren and Helena Blake grew old together on their New Mexico ranch, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built, they knew with absolute certainty that every struggle had been worth it. Every challenge had made them stronger, and every choice they had made to choose each other had been the right one. The cowboy who had found a desperate woman stealing bread in his kitchen and told her she was safe had given her everything. The woman who had accepted that safety and slowly learned to trust again had given him just as much in return. Together, they had created something neither could have achieved alone, a love that lasted, a family that thrived, and a legacy that would endure for generations to come.